Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to join us for our Housing and Growth Management Virtual Public Open House. My name is Mark Kitzelman, and I'm an urban planner with York Region's Planning and Economic Development Branch. And I will be moderating today's discussion. The computer is acting funny, so I hope you're still seeing me. What we will be sharing with you today is part of a larger consultation initiative that regional staff have developed. Okay, so I can confirm that things are okay. Good. To solicit input on how the region is proposing to accommodate growth out to 2051 and on the challenges and opportunities the region is facing on the current state of housing as we continue to grow and develop a full range of housing options. Since June of last year, members of the public have been invited to learn more about the region's planning process and to provide your thoughts on our work through our MCR process, or Municipal Comprehensive Review process, and our website at york.ca, have your say. So we're here today to provide you with an opportunity to learn more about growth management and planning for housing through a presentation that will be delivered by Paul Bottomley, Manager of Policy, Research, and Forecasting in our Long Range Planning Division, as well as an interactive Q&A where you can ask your questions to a panel consisting of Paul Bottomley, Sandra Malsick, Director of Long Range Planning, as well as Lauren Sauvé, Senior Planner with Long Range Planning. Before I hand it over to Paul, I just want to add a few housekeeping items for those of you who are unfamiliar with Zoom. You can change your viewing options at any time by clicking on the View Options icon at the top of the page. You also have the option of enabling closed captions as well, if you'd like. If you have any questions for the panel, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. Feel free to ask your questions at any time during this webinar, but we'll be holding responses to questions until the end of the presentation. If you're experiencing any technical difficulties, please use the chat feature and we will do our best to provide you with assistance. I also want to mention that the presentation will be recorded and will be available at york.ca, have your say later this week. Finally, I apologize in advance if there are any technical glitches with the presentation or the Q&A. We are all still relatively new to this type of platform and delivery. Hopefully things will run smoothly, but please bear with us if anything should come up. So without further ado, I want to thank you all again for joining us today. And I will now pass it over to Paul Bottomley, who will share the presentation. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you, Mark. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm just going to share my screen. Fantastic. So thank you for joining us today. As Mark mentioned, the presentation talks about two different but interrelated topics, growth management and housing. The region is currently updating its official plan to bring it into conformity with recent provincial legislation. And in Ontario, the province provides high-level, I'm just going to go back to that slide. Sorry about that. My cursor is acting up a little bit today. I think many of you are aware in Ontario, the province provides high-level policy documents that set the ground rules for planning that municipalities have to conform to. And in 2020, the province released updated forecasts all the way out to 2051. And they also released a new land needs assessment methodology that municipalities are required to use to calculate land needs out to 2051. And the region is anticipated to reach a total population of 2 million people and close to 990,000 jobs. It's in fact growth that's unprecedented in the region. And with that amount of growth comes both challenges and opportunities. And to meet the growth target and to ensure that the region continues to be both a desirable place to live and to work, we of course need to understand our current situation, as well as how we can deliver a diverse, affordable housing options that meet the needs of our growing population. So in March of this year, regional staff released preliminary results of land requirements to 2051, as well as proposed forecasts for the region's 9 local municipalities. And today, we're looking for input on how the region is proposing to accommodate growth to 2051 and on the challenges the region is facing in helping provide a full range and mix of housing opportunities, or options rather. So today's webinar, as Mark mentioned, provides an opportunity for you to ask questions, to learn more about our process. And you also have the opportunity to visit or have your SABE online platform that is live until July the 30th. So through the presentation, I'm going to provide some background and context information on the regional official plan update process. I'm going to summarize the provincial forecast for the region, as well as the proposed draft land needs assessment results, explaining how the region is planning to manage and accommodate to growth to 2051. The second part of the presentation focuses on the challenges associated with how the population can be housed. I think what we'll do is actually have a break before we get to that second part of the presentation. It'll just be a short break, roughly 5 minutes. And the reason for that is there is a fair amount of information that I will be presenting. And I think a break will do everyone fine just to absorb what's being presented. So for those that don't know what a regional official plan is, it's a public document. It includes policies that expresses the region's vision. It allows the public to understand how our land may be used now and in the future. And the regional official plan describes how the region plans to accommodate future growth, while at the same time meeting the needs of existing residents and businesses in the region. And the process by which the region updates its official plan is known as the Municipal Comprehensive Review, as Mark mentioned. And growth management and housing are two of the many background and technical components of the Municipal Comprehensive Review. And the graphic shows how all these reports will inform the updated regional official plan. And you can see on the graph, besides growth management and housing, there are topics covering a wide range of other issues dealing with employment, natural systems, agriculture, and others. And the check marks indicate that regional staff have brought forward to Council a series of reports covering these topics. So when we plan for growth, we are required to conform to provincial plans, and listed on the slide are several provincial documents that provide direction to municipalities, including the growth plan, the provincial land needs assessment methodology. All municipalities in the Greater Golden Horseshoe are required to conform to provincial growth plan policy, provincial growth plan targets, and use the mandated provincial methodology to calculate land needs out to 2051. The province has also been clear that urban areas cannot be expanded into the Greenbelt, and staff's forecast and land needs work is in line with this provincial direction. So York Region's 2051 forecast, I mentioned it's over 2 million people, 990,000 jobs. That's growth of 800,000 people, 340,000 jobs over the next 30 years. And the graph shows the scale of this growth for both population in green and employment in blue. And at its formation way back in 1971, the region was home to 169,000 people, 48,000 jobs. And since that time, we've reached 1.2 million today. We've grown by approximately 24,700 people each and every year. And the new provincial forecast calls for the region to grow for a slightly higher annual growth figure. It's about 26,100 people each year, and that's required to reach the 2 million target that I mentioned by 2051. So municipalities in the Greater Golden Horseshoe, they're mandated to use the provincial methodology to calculate land needs to 2051, as I mentioned. And this method is premised on achieving two key growth plan targets. It's a 50% minimum intensification target within the existing built-up area, as well as a 50 people and jobs per hectare designated greenfield area density target. And that target applies to communities outside the existing built-up area. And using this provincial methodology results in a need for 2,300 hectares of community land and 1,100 hectares of employment land out to 2051. And you can see on the slide some of the key assumptions behind the analysis. The key here is that half of the region's forecast housing growth is planned within the existing built-up areas in order to achieve that 50% intensification target that I mentioned, while most of the remaining amount is distributed to that designated greenfield area, where a demand-supply analysis determines the need for an urban expansion. And I mentioned that 2,300 hectares of community land are required. And just to picture that, for those that don't quite grasp the amount of that land, it equates to just under 6 concession blocks of land that's required for community land purposes. And on the employment land side, the region's employment forecast is distributed into 4 employment types. There's major office employment, there's population-related employment, there's jobs in the rural area, and there's jobs in our typical industrial business parks that we call employment areas. And it's that employment area category that's key to determining future land requirements. And the demand supply analysis that we undertake for our employment areas tells us that 1,100 hectares of urban expansion land is needed for growth out to 2051. So to reach the minimum 50% intensification target, growth can be accommodated within the region's 4 urban growth centers. We've got 4 centers, one in Markham, 2 in Markham actually. There's one in Richmond Hill, Vaughan, and Newmarket, as well as within the region's 78 major transit station areas, and they're located along Highway 7 and along Yonge Street, as well as adjacent to GO rail stations. A smaller amount of intensification can also be accommodated as infill in other locations throughout the existing built-up area. The region is well positioned to achieve the target out to 2051. In fact, if we go back to 2006, the housing market has already been delivering 50% intensification, and regional council and senior levels of government have invested $3.2 billion in transit infrastructure that has acted as the catalyst for a lot of this intensification growth. And the $5.6 billion Yonge North Subway Extension project will provide further opportunities for intensification moving forward. The region also hired Watson Consulting to do an assessment of the region's housing market and forecast, and they also concluded that 50% intensification is an appropriate target for the region to plan for out to 2051. So the proposed intensification rates by local municipality are shown here, and they do vary. The targeted rates are shown on the graph with the number of housing units on the left-hand side. Targets range from a high of 86% in Newmarket, 77% in Richmond Hill, down to 3% in East Gwillimbury. And the information clearly shows the large number of forecasted intensification units in Southern York region, with Markham at 50,000 units, Vaughan 49,000 units, and Richmond Hill at around 33,000 units. I mentioned the region has 78 major transit station areas along Highway 7, Yonge Street, and adjacent to GO stations. And major transit station areas are planned for some of the highest densities in the region. And the map before you shows the location of the 78 major transit station area boundaries. And most of the major transit station areas are in Markham, Vaughan, Richmond Hill, and Newmarket, which corresponds to these areas having the highest intensification rates in the region. And when we define a major transit station area, they're generally defined as an area within a 500 to 800 meter radius of a transit station, representing about a 10-minute walk. When referred to urban expansion in the region, there are 3 geographic areas that can accommodate growth from an urban expansion perspective. And it includes the Markham West Wichard Stouffville area in the southwest east part of the region, the Vaughan King area in the southwest, and East Gwillimbury in the north. And the next 3 slides present regional staff's proposal for urban expansion, locations all the way out to 2051. And these are from the March report presented to Regional Council. And this slide starts with the proposed geography in the southeast. It includes all of the lands that are available for urban expansion. And the slide details the proposed distribution of land for community uses identified in orange, employment uses in purple within Markham and Wichard Stouffville. And the table in the lower left includes the proposed urban expansion area and land use distribution in hectares. Advantages to growth in the southeast include proximity to downstream wastewater infrastructure that the region has invested in the last 10 years, as well as providing future employment lands adjacent to Markham's existing employment lands in the vicinity of Highway 404. Housing affordability does pose a significant risk associated with growth in this area. The price of ground-related homes may be problematic for young families, for example, which in turn may impact the return of development charges. The proposed geography of urban expansion in the southwest also includes all of the lands that are available for urban expansion. And Southwest York also leverages the downstream wastewater infrastructure investment that I mentioned the region has made in the last 10 years. And this area provides well-located future employment lands along Highway 427, as well as the planned GTA West corridor that can build on existing strengths in the transportation and logistics sectors within this part of the region. On the flip side, there is uncertainty surrounding the GTA West corridor, and it's shown in brown on the slide. And this presents a level of risk with the geography that's being proposed. Given that a final decision is yet to be made on whether or not the GTA West will move forward as planned, the current municipal comprehensive review has assumed that the highway will be in place. And that, of course, is an assumption that can be revisited at the time of the next municipal comprehensive review in the event that a decision of the highway will not proceed. And like Southeast York, the price of housing may impact the pace of growth and development charge collections. The remaining amount of urban expansion occurs in East Gwillimbury, and there is a lot of uncertainty surrounding the timing of the Upper York servicing solution in Northern York. And that solution is being put in place to provide wastewater capacity for residents up in that area. The proposed urban expansion includes about 180 hectares of community land up to Mount Albert Road, except for a portion of lands southwest of Yonge Street. And the proposed expansion also includes 65 hectares of employment land along Highway 404. The Upper York servicing solution is currently scheduled for completion in 2028. And once in operation, the facility provides capacity for 90,000 people in East Gwillimbury, as well as for residents in Northwest Newmarket. It further allows for the transfer capacity to service growth of roughly 30,000 people in Newmarket and Aurora via the current York-Durham sewage system. So I'm just going to move on to discuss the proposed local municipal forecasts. The slide shows the 2016 population in blue, population in blue, the 2051 forecast population in red for each of the local municipalities. And growth is expected to be driven by different factors for each. And the majority of the region's population is forecast for Southern York. It's a 74% share. And the graph shows the scale of growth for Markham, for Richmond Hill and Vaughan. Southern York, of course, has access to rapid transit, and growth is anticipated to be driven by significant intensification in these areas. And both Vaughan and Markham, in addition to intensification, will also experience a significant amount of greenfield growth related to the proposed urban expansion areas that I talked about in previous slides. In East Gwillimbury, Georgina, King, and Wichita-Stouffville, growth will be driven largely by greenfield development with smaller amounts of infill and intensification, whereas most of the growth in Newmarket will be intensification with access to a regional center and bus rapid transit, while growth in Aurora will be a fairly even mix of both greenfield and intensification units. The local municipal employment forecasts are shown here, and Markham and Vaughan are forecast to accommodate nearly 2/3 of the region's employment growth to 2051, while East Gwillimbury, Wichita-Stouffville, and Georgina are expected to experience the highest rates of growth. Vaughan is anticipated to add 130,000 jobs, Markham 127,000 jobs, and Richmond Hill at 44,000 jobs is the next highest job growth forecast. And as we plan to achieve the 2051 forecast, determining infrastructure requirements and associated costs is a key consideration. It drives the integration of our forecast and land use work, our master plan works for our infrastructure master plans for transportation, water and wastewater, as well as our fiscal strategy work. Staff at the region have prepared a preliminary estimate of $11.6 billion in infrastructure costs to support both our existing residents as well as growth in our proposed urban expansion areas, our centers and corridors, and other areas in the region. And this $11.6 billion estimate includes $3.4 billion in water wastewater projects, about $7.2 billion in roads and transit, and $1.3 billion as the region's share of the Yonge North Subway project. It's important to note that $4 billion of this $11 billion total is already in the region's current capital plan. So the preliminary timing of these new large-scale projects has informed assumptions on the pace of growth in the region, as well as the local municipal forecasts that I just showed you. And we can't grow everywhere at once, and capitalizing on existing infrastructure before making new investments and staging new investments according to the actual pace of growth becomes increasingly important as we plan for growth out to 2051. So with that, I'm just going to take a short 5-minute break, and we'll come back and we'll talk a little more about the housing portfolio and housing affordability. Okay, so I think 5 minutes is up, so I think I will continue with the presentation. Hopefully you had a bit of time to stretch, get a glass of water, have a quick snack. So now that we've talked about growth and how the region's managing growth out to 2051, I want to move on to the topic of housing affordability and housing affordability issues. Of course, growth and housing affordability are two interrelated topics, and it's important that the region is able to offer a full range of housing options for people of all ages, of all abilities, in order to meet the growth targets out to 2051. A lack of affordable housing options, may limit those who can live in York Region. And if we don't achieve the growth forecasts, lower growth will affect development charge recovery that we need to pay for the infrastructure investment that we're making. It will also impact the timing of the planned infrastructure and ultimately the region's financial sustainability. So in recent years, the region has been experiencing a lower rate of growth than forecasted. There are many factors contributing to this slower pace of growth, including the delivery of infrastructure that's been delayed, the length of time for planning approvals for secondary plan areas, and increasing housing affordability challenges, as already mentioned. The following chart shows the difference between the number of people moving in and out of York Region to the rest of the province, represented by the bars on the graph. It also shows the average resale home prices, shown by the line. The graph clearly illustrates that the number of people moving into the region has declined over recent years as house prices have increased. So when average prices were in the range of $400,000 to $600,000, the region recorded a net gain of intra-provincial migrants, while as prices have continued to increase towards the range of $1 million or more people have left the region to other parts of the province than have moved here. So a key challenge impacting the region's ability to achieve the growth targets that I've been talking about is providing affordable housing to low and middle income households. So this infographic shows how difficult it is to afford a home in the region. The estimated monthly carrying cost of a resale townhouse in 2020 was over $5,000. And in 2019, only 11% of new ownership housing on the market was affordable to households making up to $126,000. And the threshold of affordability for a house in 2019 was $484,000. And in 2020, that threshold increased to $503,000. So this erosion in affordability is impacting the housing market in a couple of ways. First, it's steadily shifting home ownership to medium and higher density housing forms, which do tend to be more affordable relative to lower density housing types, so that households that may have been able to afford a detached home in the past may now only be able to afford a row house. Similarly, a household which could afford a row house in the past may now only be able to afford a smaller high density condominium unit, for example. The second impact of affordability is placing greater pressure on rental housing needs in particular. More affordable housing units are offered through the purpose-built rental market, and there's certainly a huge impact on that market. So when we look at the cost of rental housing, costs continue to increase in the region, with many households unable to afford adequate shelter. Average rent was over $1,400 for purpose-built units and $2,200 for a rental condo in 2020. And vacancy rates were below the 3% threshold that is considered a healthy rate. This slide shows more information on the widening gap between income and housing costs. Housing costs in the region, and in fact throughout the Greater Toronto Hamilton area, have outpaced income growth. Between 2008 and 2020, as shown on the graph, the average price for a resale home in the region increased by 155%, whereas average family income rose by just under 20%. And most of that increase in income was concentrated in the higher income households. So as a result, many households are now spending too much on housing. And when households are unable to afford the ownership market, they may look to the rental market, and the rental market should be able to provide a good affordable alternative to ownership. But at 14% of the total housing stock, York Region's share of rental housing remains significantly lower than the GTHA average of 33%, as well as the provincial average of 30%. So demand for rental housing is anticipated to increase over the coming years. And the challenge for the region is to find ways to increase the rental stock so that people who cannot afford to buy can at least afford to rent a home in the region. In the fall of 2019, Regional Council approved a development charge deferral for affordable purpose-built rental buildings. It was a policy put in place to encourage new rental supply in the region. And Council also brought forward and approved a purpose-built rental servicing allocation reserve to also help encourage an increase in the rental supply. So how can the region influence the housing market generally? Well, the region has dual legislative responsibilities related to housing. It has a growth management role through the authority of the Planning Act. It recognizes affordable housing as an area of provincial interest. This is important as decision makers such as regional council must have regard to provincial interests when making land use planning decisions. Provincial policy within the provincial policy statement, as well as the provincial growth plan, provide specific growth targets and policy direction and how the region can grow, which is what I talked about in the earlier part of the presentation, while the regional official plan operationalizes the provincial legislation in a regional as well as a local context. So in addition to this growth management role, the region's also a designated service manager through the authority of the Housing Services Act. And this means that the region is responsible for the administration and funding of social housing programs, including the development of a comprehensive 10-year housing and homelessness plan. In recognition of the affordable issues the region is currently experiencing, the chairman of the region has also created a housing task force with representation from the mayors of all the 9 local municipalities, as well as the building industry. And this task force will be looking at solutions to address the affordability crisis. The region's 10-year housing plan, it's known as Housing Solutions, has been in place since 2014. And this initially set out 4 goals and 49 action items that focused on increasing and sustaining rental housing supply, affordable ownership housing, and strengthening the homelessness and housing stability service system. Now, the plan was updated in 2019. The goals have been refined slightly, but the plan is aimed largely at continuing to invest in and work with partners, support and encourage an increase of affordable and market rate rental and affordable ownership housing, while recognizing the need to provide supports to residents for those who need help to successfully find and keep housing. So we don't yet have all the answers to the challenges highlighted in the previous slides. We are updating the regional official plan to conform with updated provincial plans. Additional work to address housing affordability will continue once the regional official plan is adopted, and we're open to hearing thoughts on potential solutions or considerations as we move forward. So proposed regional official plan policy directions include increasing the residential land supply requirements, and this is achieved through the urban expansion information that I presented. We're also proposing to introduce a rental housing target in the regional official plan, and also incorporating updated second suite parameters. Of course, policy alone will not solve our housing gaps, and future work towards solutions with our partners is required. And this brings me to the next few slides, which touch on some of the options available to encourage more affordable housing. So back in January of this year, staff presented to committee and council a regional official plan update report entitled Housing Challenges and Opportunities. And this report explored the correlation between the slower population growth the region has recorded recently and the lack of affordable housing options. Attachment 3 to that report back in January included a list of tools and strategies captured under the 4 broad categories that are up on the screen before you. And the intent of this list was to increase awareness of the options available for increasing affordable housing, to be explored further and be the subject of future reports to council for direction. Many of the options require local municipal implementation or would be driven by the private sector and even consumer choice. So on the next couple of slides, I'm going to provide a few examples which highlight some of the breadth of options available to the region. and other jurisdictions. So an example of built form and diversification is the intentional use of family-friendly housing policy, which can help in providing more housing with 2 to 3 bedrooms. These are units that are large enough for families. And there's a growing need for family-friendly housing developments in areas supported by transit in the region. And a family-friendly policy lens considers opportunities for utilizing the unit itself, the building, or in the neighborhood to function better for larger size households. Council applied this concept with the creation of the Affordable Purpose-Built Rental Housing Incentive Policy that I mentioned earlier. And this is for development in the region's centers and corridors where 50% or more units that are family sized received greater incentives. Modular construction, as shown in the bottom image, is an example of a design and construction innovation. And it's a blanket term that can also include what's called container housing. It's a process in which a building is constructed off-site under controlled plant conditions. Construction of modular buildings occurs simultaneously with site work. It allows projects to be completed in the range of 30 to 50% sooner than traditional construction. And of course, there's associated cost savings that can be passed on to occupants or purchasers. In December of last year, the region's Housing York Inc. board approved the construction of 4 modular homes in the Sutton Youth Center site. So that's an example in the region. It's a great opportunity to pilot this innovation. Also back in September or December of last year, Council received a report on the region's application to a Canada Mortgage and Housing Rapid Housing Initiative for 25 to 50 units. And all these units constructed under this initiative will be modular as well. So a vacant unit tax is an example of a municipal program. It's designed to increase the city's supply of rental homes by taxing the owners of properties that are not being fully used, thus encouraging them to make the properties available for rent. And a vacant unit tax was introduced in Vancouver back in 2018, as I'm sure many of you are aware. It was implemented with a 1% property tax on homes sitting empty. The tax generated $40 million last year. The number of vacant units decreased 22% from the previous year. Rent to own is a financial tool that leads to ownership affordability, and it's typically led by the private sector. A tenant enters into an agreement with their landlord where the landlord continues to own the property and the tenant has the option to purchase the home. So this is really an alternative payment plan for those who cannot afford the upfront down payment of home ownership, and allows the renter to build up equity in the home they are leasing and provides the option for long-term tenants to become a homeowner. Of course, an example of a rent-to-own program that's close to home is the Daniels Corporation Gateway Rental Communities Program, which includes developments throughout Toronto and Peel, as well as one in the city of Markham and at 160 Chancery Road. And that, in fact, is the image that you can see in the bottom photo on the slide. So the importance of partnerships when working towards housing solutions cannot be overstated. Some of the key partners are listed on the screen here. We need to continue to work with upper levels of government, with the housing development industry and community partners, as no one will solve affordable issues on their own. The federal government sets policies that shape the overall housing market and directly delivers programs through the National Housing Strategy. Waiving HST for affordable projects is an example of how the federal government can encourage affordable housing. The province sets the legislative framework and planning for a full mix and range of housing options, determines municipal growth forecasts, the minimum densification targets and density targets around transit stations and for new communities that I talked about. And the province and the federal government can support affordability through providing financing tools, and incorporating legislation for a vacant unit tax is being an example. The region works with local municipalities and other stakeholders to determine the location of growth and the type of housing that's required to meet anticipated growth. And I've already mentioned the DC deferral program, as well as the servicing allocation program for rental projects as examples of a regional role in promoting affordability. And local cities and towns plan for their allocated growth in their local context and through policy and the review and approval of new development applications that are brought forward. And inclusionary zoning is implemented by local municipalities, and it's the only tool that's provided by the province that actually mandates the inclusion of affordable housing in new developments in major transit station areas. The development community are the actual builders of new housing and communities, as we all know, and they also help inform policy development. And the industry can provide support for affordable housing through innovations in design and construction, the modular home example that I highlighted earlier. Community partners deliver a range of services, including housing for low and moderate income households and people with disabilities. I think the point here is that we do need to continue to work together with all levels of government, the development industry, and various stakeholders in order to achieve our housing affordability goals. So now just a summary of our next steps. That does conclude the bulk of the presentation. So we'll take feedback from this webinar and continue to consult over the next couple of months, a summary of what we heard, and as well as alternate 2051 growth scenarios will be presented to Regional Council in September. Staff will be asking for direction on whether to proceed with an updated 50% intensification growth scenario or proceed with an alternate growth scenario that we'll be presenting to Council, as I mentioned, in September. We're targeting a draft regional official plan in November of this year. This, of course, will trigger continual engagement with the public, with the Indigenous communities, with local municipalities and other stakeholders. And we're targeting an adopted ROP for Q2 of next year in 2022. And as mentioned earlier, the housing portfolio will continue to be explored further beyond the adoption of the regional official plan. So that does conclude the content for today. We now want to hear from you, and we'll check to see how we are going with questions. I see a few coming through the Q&A function. So do please share your questions and comments in either the Q&A or the chat function. We're looking to hear what your thoughts are on 50% intensification, your comments on the amount of urban expansion that's being proposed to accommodate growth to 2051, as well as any other general comments on growth management and housing. Please feel free to ask any questions. We invite you to conduct our survey found at york.ca, Have Your Say. There's a chance to win a $50 gift card if the survey is completed, and it closes on Friday, July the 30th. I've also, on this slide, there's made available a couple of links to our housing information. The January housing report I mentioned earlier that was brought forward at the start of the year, and as well as the proposed forecast and land needs work presented to Council in March. And with that, Mark, I'm going to hand it back to you.
But thanks everyone for being here. The participants are slowly dwindling here. We're down to 41, but thanks you all for coming out. It's been great. Okay, bye for now.
Thank you, everyone.